Thank you very much. It's great to see you both, and great to see you as well, Al. So you were recently down in Sydney before the COVID thing really kicked off, probably one of the last big live conferences. And I'm really happy to have Sally with me on the line today. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction and talk to you about some of the things that we're doing at NAB, and in particular in response to the current situation. And then Sally, who is the true expert and actually does all our great analytics work, is going to do a little bit of a deep dive on one of the themes. So I guess sort of we're trying to share a slide here in terms of, what's different. So we do a lot of outstanding people analytics at NAB, and we do that by working closely together with our HR business partners and working closely together with the business. And I guess I just wanted to share with you what we see is different. So number one is people analytics used to be a thing that the best chief HR officers in the world cannot live without. But it is still a bit of an elective. So you still have HR functions and chief people officers that actually bid. The best ones all do it and build that function. I think what we've seen during the current situation is it's no longer an elective. It's no longer a nice to have. It's an absolute need to have. You simply need to have it to manage your crisis response, to make sure that the business keeps its lights on, and to make sure that you're supporting your colleagues. So I guess the silver lining throughout all of this is that it moves people analytics really to the center of a lot of things, and that is both a huge privilege and also a huge responsibility. Some of the things we're seeing really sort of kicking off lately is really daily reporting. So you need really, really good data to be able to do daily reporting and daily trends on, for instance, absenteeism, different types of absenteeism, where work gets done by whom, and all of that stuff. So really be able to track that. So usually that's a thing you do on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis, but you need to be able to have that at your fingertips and have that updated daily. And that means you have to update your underlying engines. And of course, then data quality, data management, data architecture, and underlying technology becomes more important than ever. You also need to be able to merge a lot of HR data with a lot of different data, and that's really where companies like NAB that are investing in a data lake really get ahead. And we've seen multiple examples of that led by our Chief Data Officer, Glenda Crisp, and that whole analytics community that we are a part of at NAB. One of the things we've done with the great help of Glint is also really dialing up not just one-way communication, which we've done really, really well in terms of daily updates, sometimes several times a day, using Workplace, using emails, using whatever means possible to update everyone on what's going on. But we've also made sure that this is two-way communication, and we've done that by launching really short, sharp, crisp Glint surveys. And we've turned them around in the last one was within 20 hours. We have one live now that closes at midnight, so in 6 hours our time, that will actually share the results with all our senior leaders and leaders tomorrow. So there will be a 9-hour turnaround, just getting rapid feedback on what are people feeling, how are they coping, are there any areas that need additional support, and how can we really step in to lead this situation. And that is somewhat more frequently than we'd normally do it, and requires us to churn the data and use the analytics really rapidly. And Glint's platform, in terms of the inbuilt analytics, and in particular also of the verbatims, is just it's a lifesaver. Another thing we really focused on is just supporting internal redeployment. So as you can imagine, this is not just a health crisis; it's also a huge economical crisis, and it impacts a lot of our customers. We're a bank, impacts a lot of our small businesses, and of course they need additional support. And that means that to manage all the phone calls that we get from our customers and all the customers emailing us or chatting to us, we simply didn't have enough people. So we managed to very quickly redeploy 700 people from other functions who had previous experience with customer-facing roles, and we did that within a few days. So that also shows the importance of having really good HR data in a situation like this. And then the final area, I'll really hand over to Sally for her to introduce herself and just do a little bit of a deep dive of what you can do with other more innovative data sources as well. And then, of course, the secret sauce is tying it all together and make sure it's supportive and you're driving the right actions. And of course, that data privacy is respected throughout this. So it's people data for good and really trying to be supportive here. So with that, I'll hand over for Sally to take you through the next bit.
Thank you, Thomas. So I will use the next sort of 20, 25 minutes or so to run through one of the super exciting projects that we've been working on for the last 8 to 10 weeks or so. And that is weekly insights for two groups. So one is a weekly email for our leaders, which is embedded with 4 or 5 metrics that come from a very different data source, which I'll get to in a moment. The other is a weekly dashboard that profiles change across the business. So I mentioned it's quite a different data source. Many of our people metrics move at a glacially slow rate. So we have transitioned in the last 12 months or so to using a extract of Outlook metadata, and that gives us amazing rapidly moving insights into connectivity across the organisation, as well as the way that people are spending their time. And we've been working with partner Microsoft Workplace Analytics to set this up at in a really fast-paced way. So I touched on the two things that we've been providing, the weekly email and the weekly reports. These solutions were designed around 3 principles. The first is simple, the second actionable, and the third being ethical or people analytics for good. In terms of simple, I mentioned that we had to launch something at speed. So we started low tech with an email as well as a static report. And the idea is that we scale this up over time. The second being actionable. So we've run a couple of pilots with the Microsoft Workplace Analytics data, and we knew from those analytics what our high-performing leaders did differently. So that included more one-on-one time, more time managers had in one-on-ones, and being more connected with their stakeholders. So we built this into our solution that we'll talk about today. The third, ethical. So we really wanted to use data in the right way. So our initial solution is at a team level because we want to protect confidentiality of individuals in those teams. And our leaders only receive reports if they have 5 or more direct reports or people in their teams. A little bit about the metrics that we included in those solutions. So the weekly email. The first is time in collaboration or time in meetings and emails, and how that compared back to February, so a period that was pre-COVID-19 in Australia. The second was time in after-hours meetings and emails, and once again this was compared to February. So between those 2 metrics, it gives us a sense of how work patterns are changing, and it enables our leaders to keep an eye on wellbeing as well. The third is the one-on-one time, and that relates to the connectivity of our leaders. So being an email and being a low-tech solution, it also allowed us to connect out to other resources and things on our intranet that our colleagues in leadership development were providing at the time to support leaders through the transition and the new way of working. In terms of the second component, the exec reporting, we used exactly the same metrics, but in a slightly different way. And that enabled us to paint a picture about changes in the ways that people were working. So we could see 3 things. 1, the changes in the way and the types of the collaboration tools that were being used across NAB. We could also see variation in experience between our colleagues, and that leaders were connecting with their teams, mostly via sort of team check-ins. So I'll take you through examples of each of these views that were provided to our executives to give you a little bit more detail. So our first view illustrates the change in work patterns across the last 8 to 10 weeks. So at a high level, we can see our time in meetings and emails in February, that's our baseline period. It's relatively consistent. In early March, we saw a drop as many of our colleagues transitioned to remote working. It picked up as people adapted to new ways of working, and then dropped again as we had the Easter break and school holidays in Australia. This view also shows a shift in the mix of tools and the ways that people were collaborating. So you can see from the bottom section of the chart that meetings were fairly consistent through sort of that 10 weeks or so, but our use of email and chat increased by around about 25%. So hallway conversations and things that would traditionally take place in our buildings in Melbourne, Sydney and other capital cities around Australia were being replaced by online collaboration and more email traffic. When we took a closer look at the time of day, we could actually see the increase in collaboration throughout the day in this middle section. And we could also see the change into the evening as well. So from the surveys that we were running at the same time, we knew that the after-hours collaboration was associated with flexibility as people were juggling more responsibilities. There was also some system access issues and internet issues in Australia, and of course additional workload as people were absorbing extra responsibility as well. So this is something we really wanted to keep an eye on and highlight to people leaders through our weekly emails. So we also took a look at connectivity, or the number of active relationships that colleagues were maintaining through the use of Outlook. So I've already mentioned that while our collaborative activity increased over recent weeks, we saw that our colleagues were maintaining the same number of active relationships through Outlook. So this gave us an indication that people were using new tools to maintain their connectivity, maintain relationships, and that they were starting to replace those hallway conversations with our online platforms that were available remotely. And of course, through the comments in the employee survey, we knew that some people were experiencing a disproportionate shift in ways of working over that time. So we thought we'd dive into this and take a macro view of individuals and to see what sort of shifts were taking place. So these results really confirmed that the change in activity and change in work activity was not distributed equally across the organisation. So most of our colleagues, around about 50%, experienced little or no change over that 2-month period. So that means that they spent a similar amount of time in meetings, emails, and had a similar number of connections, active connections in their network. The other half experienced a significant shift. So around 30% had a lot more meetings and emails, so they were filling up their day with back-to-back Zoom meetings and email traffic. And the remainder had that as well as more maintaining relationships across NAB. So from here we wondered who was actually experiencing that shift. So we took a look at these results by level of seniority, roles by seniority in the organisation, as well as the different areas in the business to see whether the patterns were the same. So when we look at this chart illustrates seniority. When we look at seniority, and the darker colours indicate more senior roles, we can see both inside of hours and outside of hours that the more senior employees were experiencing a greater degree of change. So this included a shift in the ways of working. So during the day, they typically had days full of meetings as well as emails. And then when we look at before and after the traditional workday, they had longer hours. So starting earlier and continuing into the evening. In terms of the business unit view that we took a look at, we could see our colleagues that experienced the biggest shift were some of our bankers that were supporting businesses, small business, so responding to lots of calls and lots of queries around how we support them through change, and also a large number of our corporate functions. So our colleagues in technology working to stand up remote solutions and a number of initiatives that were required over that time period. So the last element that we took a look at was time with manager. So I mentioned from previous analytics, we knew that time between a leader and their team member was important for performance as well as engagement. And over the 6 to 8 weeks that we've been using the data, we could see that leaders were connecting with their teams mostly via sort of group check-in situations. So this was not really a surprise because it was something that we were actively encouraging. But interestingly enough, over that same time period, for those weeks, the time in one-on-ones remained the same. And I did take a quick look at last week's results earlier today, and interestingly enough, we have seen a small increase. I don't know whether that's associated with our regular half-year performance process or whether that is a trigger as we've been reminding people with those regular weekly emails. So the final question, I guess, is where to from here. So it's early days and we've learned a lot along the way. Some of our leaders have really liked the insights. We've had some interesting feedback and asking for more. Others have asked questions about the metrics and how they've been calculated. And a few people have asked for more, so include additional views and also to include additional data sources, so things like Jira and collaboration tools that are used by our technology folk. So from here, we're planning to do a few things because this is designed to be an evolving product and something that evolves through learning. So we will migrate from a low-tech email solution. That's been a useful prompt, but we will scale it up into more dynamic dashboards. The second thing is that there's an opportunity to build this into our enterprise leader toolkit. So NAB is making a huge investment in enterprise leadership over the coming year, and this will be an amazing resource for our leaders to draw on over time. The third is, and I've already alluded to it, is including other data points for some parts of our business to increase the level of insight and meaning that they receive through these results. So the idea with this is that we start small and scale up over time. So as we receive additional requests, we will factor them into the reports. And the fourth thing is doing additional exploration. So as we've set up more regular employee surveys, we can bring insights from the employee surveys together with the insights from Microsoft Analytics and dive in to obtain further detail.
Great, thanks very much for that, Sally. So let me just round off, and before we sort of kickstart the Q&A with David Green, I guess what we are experiencing here is also a new way of working in terms of what I call rapid delivery. So I think if Sally and I and the many people that helped us implement this were doing this outside of the COVID situation, we would have done this over 9 months maybe, and it would have been sort of, carefully planned, comms planned, when are we doing this? Maybe a pilot first, and then we scale it and so on. Where basically the steer we're getting right now is, do it for everybody and test and learn as you go. So we did have conversation with our executives before we roll out initiatives like this. And so the days of, you have half a year to perfect this, those are just, that's not what we're experiencing currently. And that also, it means we realize that we can deliver stuff at significantly greater pace than we would outside of in a normal working environment. And we're really trying to take that back into our daily operating rhythm as we get past this. On the downside, it also means that you'll make mistakes, but people forgive you if you implement things rapidly and you make sure you deliver stuff with value and you make sure you get rapid feedback on your products from your leaders, which we made sure we did. So I think this is then on top of all the other stuff we do in terms of people analytics, but it just shows how central all of these different initiatives actually become. And how helpful data becomes, in particular, when all of a sudden you have 80% of your workforce working remotely while you have significantly increased workload. So that's really sort of the key learnings from that. Happy to turn it over to any questions or comments.
Thomas, Sally, thank you very much. That was fascinating. And it's, as you said, Thomas, amazing what you can stand up in a short period of time if people are prepared that you can't test everything. This current situation obviously means that we can't do that. We've got quite a lot of time for questions. So again, if people want to ask questions via Slido, then please do so. I'll kick things off though, Thomas. You talked a little bit about the data lake that you have access to at NAB. And the close collaboration with your colleagues, I think Glenda Crispin, the chief data officer, and the other analytics teams in the bank. Can you talk a little bit to that on how that actually works? I mean, I know from myself when I came there, and you get together on a fairly irregular basis to share learning. But I think it'd be really helpful and instructive for people listening to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So we're very fortunate to have a truly visionary chief data officer in Glenda Crisp, right? And the vision is relatively simple. So instead of having small data puddles, in HR, and we bring in a bit of finance data or a bit of customer data, and they do the same in finance and they do the same in the customer divisions. We basically pool all our resources together and have one big data lake, and we make sure we do that in a structured and safe way. Making sure that we have the right data lineage, the right data quality, and then put different visualization and exploration tools on top of it. And it's just, it's infinitely more valuable because people analytics is really part of a value chain, right? If you only have people data, it's mostly reporting, or maybe you're predicting turnover. But what's really interesting is figuring out what are the people elements in those end-to-end value chains for our customers, where outcomes could be NPS or revenue or other measures of impacts to customers, risk, many different angles. And what we're seeing is that the interesting analytical patterns, they really follow our value chains. They don't follow the silos that we have in our organization, that we collaborate across. And that's really the vision that we see coming to life in a data lake, right? And I guess all we then need to be very mindful of is that a lot of HR data is very sensitive. So making sure that you set up data privacy and access rules and all of that stuff so that you are respecting the privacy of your colleagues. But provided you do that, you actually have an opportunity to lift the entire analytics community. And then also drive sort of one way, same way, and get synergies out of it. So I'm very excited about NAB leading into that.
Thanks, Thomas. And he talked a little bit about the privacy angle there, which obviously, as we know, is really important. I mean, the whole ethos of this conference is people data for good, and something I know that the three of us, and everyone else involved in the next 3 days believes passionately in. When I talk to practitioners around the world about using some of the tools that you've used, for example, with workplace analytics, and call them organizational network analysis, relationship analytics, whatever we want to call it, there is some concern, I think, around that. So I'd be interested on how you approach that within the bank, around the steps that you took. And Sally, please feel free to jump in as well. The steps that you took to actually to get widely accepted that you could use those tools. I guess a lot of it is about giving value back to the people that provide the data.
Yes, I'm happy to kick off, and then Sally can chip in. So we made sure we started this conversation at the top. So we had this conversation with our most senior leadership team, and basically put everything on the table and said, here's the direction, here are the dilemmas, there are pros, there are cons, and how this is communicated is incredibly important. So made sure that we got our great colleagues from communications to help us make sure that this landed in the right way, right? And then there was a robust discussion, and we ended up saying we think the value of this, when done safely, outweighs any potential downside. So let's try and do it, but then also be open to the fact that we'll get feedback, and we might not get it right to begin with, but it's better to do an 80% solution really quickly in the current environment than to perfect it over the next half year, and then when it's ready, it might not be needed anymore. We also made sure we had a really robust conversation with our GM of data privacy, and we sort of made it clear these guidelines that we have on, for instance, we won't show individual information to anyone. We'll only do team level reporting, because it's about helping leaders support their teams. So really making sure that we were following those guidelines, and those, by the way, aligns to the guidelines that Microsoft have. So we're very happy with that, and made sure that if anybody wanted more granular data to that we had a firm stance in terms of saying no. So that's basically it. And then Sally, you were sort of in the crux of it and getting all the feedback. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think a key first step was really back to our principles of keep it simple and then scale up. So there is a lot of different metrics that can be used, and a lot of data. We selected 4 or 5 where we knew they would be valuable. One from the previous analytics, and then that allowed us to it allows us to grow and change things over time.
And I think it's so important, isn't it? Because it gives you a different insight into how the organization is collaborating. As you said, you can really understand, that you've tested and you've understood that the best managers have more frequent one-to-one time with their teams. This is a great way of showing that and then presenting that in a way to managers that it almost helps change behavior.
Hey, if I can jump in real quick, because me being rude, that's what I do. So Thomas and Sally, hey, great seeing you. Thank you for contributing. I know it's evening over there. David's not seeing the questions come in, so I thought I'd just jump in, and because we are getting some questions coming in from the audience. So just wanted to ask a couple, if that's okay. And one is biased because I had the good fortune of listening to you in Sydney a couple months back, and you talked about bringing employee experience together with people analytics and why you thought that was important. So do you mind speaking to that, Thomas? And in turn, Sally, how that helps you get things done where you don't have to have a other initiative over here that you're potentially competing with?
Yeah, so I'm happy to pick that up. So, I mean, in short, we have a setup where we have employee experience or colleague experience sit together with people analytics and sit together with HR technology. And it's really because the analytics helps you identify what works, what are the value drivers, what are the people-related value drivers of customer satisfaction, of sales, of a safer operation, of a operation with better well-being for your colleagues, all the good things that we want. The human-centered design and that's embedded in employee experience helps you make that intuitive and helps you turn that into nudging. So we go, okay, great, we have these insights, and sometimes, those aggregate insights can look a little bit academic, right? And the question we get from our leaders is, so what? So there's value in that, how are you going to actually change behavior? And that's where we use employee experience, human centered design to turn that into nudging. So how would we design it so it's easy for people to do the right thing? And we support that with these initiatives. And the final piece is then technology to scale it, right? So I believe Sally sent these emails out to 2,500 leaders every week. We can't do that without technology, right? And as we further enhance the platform. So the idea is to nudge leaders. You don't have to go somewhere and search for this. You just get it, and then you see, okay, I have a few people that, or my team is spending too much time in the evening. Should I be concerned about burnout? Or they're working so many hours. How do I think differently about prioritization and so on? So I think we're seeing sort of the end-to-end value chain from the analytics onto the employee experience and then onto the actual technology to scale it. I hope that makes sense, Al.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can now see the questions. That's good, and they're coming in thick and fast. So Sally, I'll turn to you for this one. This is from Carolyn Starr from Cognizant. Firstly, thank you so much. Could you talk more about the additional sources of data that you're looking to include beyond survey data? So I think you were talking about bringing together the survey data from Glint with the insights you're getting from the workplace analytics. Are there other data sources that you're looking to bring into that as well?
So one of the early sources that has been identified as a value add for our technology team is the use of our internal tools for software development. So Jira, there are a number of tools that are used internally. And what we could see through our data was that our technology teams tended to use those more than they used Microsoft Outlook and Teams. So that will be one area that we explore, where we've identified that there's business value in incorporating that early on. And as Thomas mentioned, the data lake and the infrastructure that has been set up for NAB as an enterprise enables us to leverage that more easily and more quickly. So there's a little bit of work in terms of getting all of those data sources together in one lake. But our colleagues in the central analytics team are working through the logistics of how do we tie everything together and make sure that it makes sense for our leaders. Other things that have been mentioned as ideas but are yet to come forward as sort of formal value adds for parts of our business are the systems that our bankers use. So there's lots of applications and lots of things that they use to look after our customers day to day. And I have no doubt that there are going to be more added to the list as we go too.
That's great, Sally, and the questions are certainly coming in thick and fast. I think this is a great question from Tim. Tim, thank you for this question. When you've been doing the analysis, Sally or Thomas, have you noticed a change in working patterns for those who are with care commitments, either for elderly relatives or children perhaps, or specific demographics apart from seniority? And I guess this is, the caregivers amongst us. I mean, I know some of the people I've been speaking to, they've been sharing work with their partner, whilst half of the day they're actually teaching their kids. Have you noticed any particular differences around that, both from surveys and through the workplace analytics tool as well?
Through surveys and also through many of my colleagues that have talked about their experience over recent weeks, we absolutely know that people are in that situation. In terms of analytics, it's not something that I've looked at yet, but there is potential to do so in combining the Microsoft Analytics data with the results from our Glint survey in coming weeks.
And one of the things we're doing in a couple of weeks is utilizing Glint to basically get some feedback from our people, because we really want to ask them, how's it going? And then make sure that we do some of those breakdowns on different demographic groups as well. Because I mean, it's perhaps easy to work from home if you have a big house and your own office. It's different if you are, renting in a flat with 4 other people. So it could be very different. And we also want to get some information on what are people's preferences for when we start, hopefully soon, getting out of the COVID situation. Because I think we've seen our whole work from home, flexibility, digitization journey be accelerated by 10 years in 2 months. And I guess that's a silver lining. And I think the survey will really tell. But I'd be surprised if the results come back and say, I never want to work from home again. I want to be 5 days in the office, right? So perhaps the results will show, actually, I want to do 1 to 2 days at home. And think of the implication. And as Sally showed, people actually work more than when they work from home. So there's both an upside and a downside to that. And of course, there are knock-on implications to long-term thinking. What about real estate? I mean, big office buildings in the center of big cities, that's expensive, commuting, all that stuff, right? From personal experience, I can see that I've seen my share of kids, dogs, partners, including my own, jumping in on calls. My favorite one is a guy who works for me. His son interrupted our one-to-one Zoom call and asked me if I liked rainbows. His 4-year-old son, right? So, and I think it's stuff like that helps you connect to your colleagues in a slightly different ways as well. So we'll get more data on it. Is the question, and we think there is an impact.
It's certainly presenting a lot more questions that we can hopefully answer in people analytics, as you said, around when the return to the office happens. I won't call it return to work, because I think we're all working, as your data shows, even more than we perhaps were before. How do you decide who returns to the office and who doesn't? Hopefully there's some personal choice involved in that. Hopefully there's something around maybe caregivers being given precedent. Hopefully it's understanding maybe how certain job families or certain people perhaps, do they enjoy working from home, or as you said, are they more collaborative? Are they balancing those, as you said, not so that the burnout risk again from doing longer hours as well, and it's that blurring of work and home. It really is a fascinating period, I think, in many respects, but probably coming out of this, and let's hope we come out of it soon, even more fascinating as well. As you said, and I love that quote, that it's accelerated your digital transformation by 10 years in 2 months. It's and I'm sure you're not the only organisation that's experienced that. There was one question No, you go ahead, Thomas.
Sorry, and I think sort of part of why we actually wanted to get some of this data was really people analytics for good, because most of our executives are very modern, but we probably had sort of 1 or 2 leaders somewhere in the organization who thought that if people worked from home, they wouldn't be working. They'd be lying on the couch watching Netflix. So the data has really helped progress that conversation as well. So I think that's an example of people analytics for good.
And then from a leader perspective, because I think there's been a lot of talk about the impact for a normal employee of suddenly having to work from home. But for managers, and I guess some of the insights you've been providing has supported that, suddenly, particularly for managers that aren't used to managing remote teams, how have some of the insights that you have provided really helped managers, make sure they're having those one-to-ones perhaps, but also cope themselves? Because I guess it's an even, in some respects, an even bigger challenge for managers.
So I think based on the feedback that we received from some of our managers, they found it to be a really useful prompt. So we've had a number of queries about where do these come from, how are they calculated, and then when you scroll down and you look at the email below, you can see that there's a few results that may have stood out to them or been interpreted as being a little bit controversial. One that comes to mind was a leader that provided commentary around what they felt as being the value of the analytics, and then said, it reminds me that I haven't booked one-on-ones in for a while, which I will do now. So I think if it is seen as a useful prompt and a nudge in a direction that we know and we are confident is more likely to engage employees, then it's had a good outcome for the short, medium and longer term.
And I guess sort of to build on what Sally is saying, this was bundled up with other communications, and our great colleagues in OD, our HR partners, our leadership development people, bundle it up with resources for leaders on, how do you lead a remote team, link to some of the best LinkedIn articles, short videos, and, try to bring in many great resources, right? So this is sort of, it's one piece of a broader package supporting leaders to support their teams.
Thanks. So not only do you get interrupted by kids, you get interrupted by your wife printing off your kids' schoolwork, which you might be able to hear in the background at the moment from me. But hopefully you can still hear me. Apologies for that. Have you, through the surveys, for example, that you're doing with Glint, and it's great that you're standing these up in 9 hours, for example, to provide the insights, I think was what you said at the start, Thomas. Do you have any metrics indicating that employees, how employees have felt supported by this initiative? Because I guess you need to ask the questions, but you also need to take actions as well. So, I mean, have you been following up with employees to see how their response to the bank's response, I guess, to the crisis?
Yeah, indeed. So we worked with Ed Hurst from Glint, so one of their measurement experts, on what are the types of questions we should be asking right now. And basically, our first survey only had 3 questions, right? And one was on how are you feeling supported during the current situation, and another one very similar, and a third one, is there anything else we can help you with, right? And first of all, we're very happy to see our scores were very high in terms of how we're communicating, how people feel supported, and so on. And sort of the instant analytics of all the verbatims, because it was more in the verbatims than in the rated questions that we really got the value out of it. And Glint's product also has a feature where you can sort on the prescriptive comments. So basically when your employees are giving you suggestions, right? And then making sure that we distributed that to 2,500 leaders, within 24 hours of the survey closing, just meant that basically we enabled all leaders to get that feedback from their entire team. And we got great feedback on that initiative, and we also got great feedback on the intuitiveness of Glint's platform, because it is very slick and has good sort of user interface as well. And based on that, we're then doing the second one now and so on. So I think that's sort of a centerpiece, right? So we were happy with that initial temperature check, and that also gives our specific leaders with particular results and opportunities to go in and double down on any efforts that need to be made to support our colleagues.
Thanks, Thomas. And we'll see on one of the slides now showing on the screen, we've got some of the questions. It's going to test my eyesight, I think, the one in the middle there. So it's actually quite a good question around how have you been able to compare productivity in the current environment versus normal? So, I mean, what sort of, you talked about some of the patterns I think you're seeing, but what sort of controls have you put in, given it's very different to where we were back in February?
So I think productivity is the wrong word here, because I mean, for now we're mining Outlook metadata, right? So it's email and Outlook meetings, right? And I think very few of us would say that the more emails you write, the more productive you are. I mean, it depends what type of emails you write, and who you write them to, and do you remember to send them, and all that stuff. And we wanted to use this as a proxy for workload. And we're also going into this saying, you know what, it's a proxy. This is not a good productivity measure. It's a proxy that gives leaders an indication of how much work is actually going on, and how do we manage workload, and in particular look after our people so they don't get burnout. And we were very upfront and clear about that in our communication as well. It did, however, enable us to show that people are in fact sending a lot of emails and doing a lot of emails and doing a lot of chat and so on, so that a lot of activity is going on. I think productivity should be measured by the right productivity metrics, right? So the outcome. So we do have that from other parts of the bank, and obviously a huge spike in customers supported, number of phone calls, number of cases, number of loan all of that stuff, right? So I think that those are better metrics for that than this stuff, to be honest. So I'd call it more of an indicator of workload than a pure productivity metric.
Perfect. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I thought I'd come back to one of the things you said at the outset, Thomas, and I know it's something that we've shared over email as well, that, you know, the best CHROs have kind of recognized that they need people analytics for some time, and those organizations have built, you know, like you have at NAB, a very successful people analytics organization that's delivering value to the business and to its workforce as well. You know, for some of the people watching that maybe HR leaders in organizations where people analytics isn't so embedded, or maybe people analytics leaders or people that are interested in being in that space as well, what would you say to those organizations in terms of where should they get started? There's maybe 3 things that they could do to try and put people analytics on the map in their organizations. What would you say? And you don't have to stick to 3. And Sally, you might want to chip in as well.
Okay. Yeah. So number 1, you know, join Inside 222 and the PAFOW community, because you don't, you know, other people have built this before. You have and you've done a great job, David, and you as well, Al, in terms of building a community around this, right? So if you want to move quickly, join these communities and learn from what others have done, learn from the many mistakes that we've done collectively, and also the successes that we've had, would be my first thing. And then I'd also go, you know, start by something the business really cares about. And businesses are different. In some businesses, it's customer satisfaction. In others, it's safety. It's, you know, start with those key metrics that the CEO and the executive leadership team really care about, and then link your people outcomes to that, and make sure you're tangible on the so what and the actions. And when you get sort of a little bit more up and running, I would strongly recommend separating reporting from the advanced analytics, because the advanced analytics that Sally leads at NAB, it's a different ball game. It requires a bit of a project portfolio that Sally leads, and it's really about bringing HR data and non-HR data together, and doing change management. And if you don't make that a dedicated role, they will never get to it, because there's always urgent reporting that you need to do. So those would be my 3 things. But of course, starting by connecting with you, David, at Inside 222 and the PAFOW community, and following you on LinkedIn with all the great resources you both have now.
That's very, very kind of you, Thomas, and thank you for that. And on that last point, actually, because that's a question that I get asked a lot. When you separated the advanced analytics and reporting, is it still under you, but you just have distinct teams with Sally leading the advanced analytics, or is reporting somewhere else in the bank?
No, it's still under me, and it was the same model at Shell, and there's a lot of value in terms of having the 2 teams together. But you need designated resources for the advanced stuff, because it's a bit of a different beast, and different stakeholders, different cadence, different risk appetite, different change management skills required. So the analogy I always use is it's a bit like running a hospital, perhaps very relevant in these days. You need nurses and doctors. And you know, as a patient, we need both. But you know, they're separate roles, but they need to work together, but do separate things for all of that to work. And I think people analytics and reporting, it's a bit the same. Both are incredibly valuable, but they're distinct.
Thomas, Sally, thank you so much for joining us from the evening in Melbourne, and I think you've both earned yourself a nice glass of wine now, if that's what you like. And there's certainly some fine Australian wine, so I know. So thank you very much. Absolutely instructive as ever, and a great way to kick off proceedings for these 3 days. Al, do you want to say a few words before?
I was just going to say, absolutely, Thomas, Sally, thanks so much for rising to the occasion and sharing and contributing like you do, not only to us, but also there in Australia. It was you all are hitting out of the park, and you're an inspiration. So thank you. Keep up the great work, and hope to see you all soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.